Today we're interviewing Charlotte Hutchens. She's written a book, one of our Columbia County authors, and I'm Barbara Hanger. And Charlotte's going to talk to us about where she was born and how she started with writing the book and what the name of the book is and all those little goody things. You were born in?
Yeah, I was born in Astoria, South Dakota, a small town in east central South Dakota.
And your mother and father, since you're a teacher, were they teachers?
Mother was a teacher. She graduated from high school and taught 7 years in eastern South Dakota. My dad, well, he and Grandpa had a store, a general store, until the store burned. And then we moved to Crosby, North Dakota, way up in the northwest corner of North Dakota, where he managed a men's clothing store.
I bet it was cold up there.
It was cold, but you know, we were used to cold. South Dakota isn't exactly warm, and South Dakota has lots of snow. I remember that very well. We had lots of fun growing up. We were 6 kids, and we're close together. We had lots of fun growing up, and we're still very, very close.
Don't you have twin sisters?
I have twin sisters. My brother has passed away, but my 4 sisters live together in Bismarck, North Dakota.
Now? They're all, your 4 sisters are still alive?
They're still alive. Mm-hmm.
Are you the oldest, the youngest, the middle?
I'm the oldest. The twins are the middle. And the other 2 sisters are the 2 younger ones. And we still talk often on the telephone, see each other as often as we can, because we're all getting older. I'm 94 and my youngest sister is 10 years younger. So you see.
How did, I'm thinking in my mind here, 4 sisters all living in the same house, all in the same kitchen.
Well, they take turns cooking, a week each. And the 2 then do the cleaning up, and 1 has a week free. And it's working out very well. Of course they have their moments of disagreeing. That's human, but when someone needs help or someone gets sick, they're right there to help each other.
There's got to be a lot of love in there.
There is. There's a lot of love and care, even though they do sometimes have problems getting along. But they each have a bedroom and a bathroom.
They each have their own.
They each has her own. So that helps a lot. And it's lots of fun to go and see them.
Didn't John and Lynn take you back?
Yes, John and Lynn have taken me back twice. And they just love to go and visit with the girls. The twins are very active in, you see, all our grandparents were born in Norway. So they belong to the Sons of Norway. And they, even now at 89, the twins are 89, they sing in the chorus.
Wow.
And they go to other towns and sing. They go to the schools and sing their Norwegian songs. And the girls also, the twins also are experts on this Norwegian needlework called hardanger. And they give classes.
Good grief.
they teach younger people who are interested in that craft, and they have another group of older women that enjoy doing it and getting together.
So it'll carry on the tradition.
They're carrying on the tradition, and it's quite wonderful, I think, that they still do that. I never could master that craft.
You haven't got into it yet. How about with you being 94 and your twins 89, how long did your parents live?
Mother died at 60, I think she was 66, and Dad had a heart attack at 70.
Good grief, they died early, didn't
Yes, they did. I had an uncle who lived to 94 and an aunt who lived to be 91.
So there's some of them.
So some of them.
Uh-huh. How did you end up in Dayton?
Well, I went to college in Minot, North Dakota, to become a teacher. And my first job was in a rural school 22 miles south of Malta, Montana. They sent to North Dakota for teachers because they liked the way they were trained. They thought they were better trained teachers than Montana. And I taught in that rural district for 3 years, then moved to a small town in eastern Montana called Lambert.
Where was Lambert?
Lambert is near Sidney, Montana. Do you know? It's north of Glendive. It's right along the Montana-Dakota border. I had the first 4 grades. And I wanted to get west. I wanted to get into the mountains because I was an adventurous person. And I taught there 2 years and then got a job farther west at Rudyard, which was just west of Havre. But I didn't like it there. It was awfully cold and there was lots of snow. Then I got a job at Ronan, which is near Missoula.
Each one was just a little farther west,
Yes,
right?
And I taught there 6 years and enjoyed it very much. And then I got a job in Dayton because the salary was pretty good. I came here, taught here 2 years, came here in 1943 and taught 2 years and then went back and taught in Missoula. And then Lloyd and I were married.
How did you meet Lloyd?
The teachers, a couple of the teachers were friends of his. He was married and his wife died. And so Ruth and Laura Lee were instrumental in getting us together.
They must have thought you were a pretty special person because Lloyd's first wife was a real good friend of Laura Lee's, right?
Right.
So Laura Lee must have thought you were pretty special.
Yeah, well, Laura Lee and I were great friends, and we still are. I don't see her as often because she's in a home in Walla Walla. But our families grew up together, and we were really close.
And you have how many children?
2.
2.
John, and then we adopted Tom.
And he just lives down the road a
Down the
little
road.
ways.
And I'm very lucky. John takes good care of me here. Don't suppose I could live here if he didn't live here on this place.
Well, when my daughter worked for you in Harvest and drove a truck,
Yes.
she said your husband Lloyd was so skinny. She called him skinny, thin,
Yeah.
or whatever. And she said she never saw any man could eat the amount of food that Charlotte sent out in his lunch every day.
That's right. He had a good appetite, but he never gained.
He never did he?
Mm-mm.
And then
Then I taught at Columbia. Well, I substituted in the schools in Dayton and Columbia. And you remember Grace Johnson.
Yes.
She had surgery one year after Christmas, and I finished up the year for her. And then when the dam was being built, Little Goose, I taught first grade 1 year, because there were so many first graders that Pearl and Zelma couldn't handle them.
So they had 3 first grades and
There
a
were
central?
4 first graders.
4 for kids, a central?
Grades. It's in Dayton School.
Mhm.
I forget the name of the other first grade teacher. I'm sorry.
Well, Columbia, where you,
Then I taught.
When
then
you taught
Columbia decided it was time. It was about almost time to consolidate with Dayton. You see, Columbia was school district number 1.
the very first school
The
in
very
Columbia
first
County.
school district in this area, and Dayton is school district number 2. You know, it has the oldest high school and all that. But so they asked if I would teach a couple of years so they could hold the school and not consolidate. But after 2 years, they thought it was time. So I did. The first year I taught the 4 upper grades. And that was hard because I'd always been a primary teacher. And the people were very understanding. And then the next year, the 7th and 8th grade went to town, and I had the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. And I was head teacher, they called me. And that year, we were planning to do something special because Columbia was to go out of existence. And the visual aids man, I don't remember his name either, but anyway, I talked to him about it. And you remember Carl Nelson,
Yes.
who was superintendent of the Dayton schools. Well, he wrote a his master's thesis on consolidating these schools. And somebody told me about that. And so this visual aids man said, I'll write to Washington State and I'll get a copy of this thesis. And he did. And in that thesis were these pictures that I have that you
Of each school.
of these schools. I think there were 35 schools. This was in 1929. He and his wife and Mr. and Mrs. Henry Gaines used to go out on Sundays, I was told, and take pictures of these schools.
Because some of them were still standing.
They were still standing, and some of them were still in use in that year, too, in 1929. So this visual aids man said, let's take these pictures out. They were put into the book with art corners, you know. So we very carefully took these pictures out of his thesis, had negatives made of them, and put them back again. And that's how I got the pictures. And that's how I started being interested in these old schools.
Well, to me, it's interesting that you taught at Columbia School. It was the first school in Columbia County, and it was the last school to be consolidated.
Right.
And didn't it have something to do with, once it was consolidated, then our taxes were going to change or something?
I don't remember that.
It has something to do with taxes, I know, and they were fighting having
I
consolidated.
don't know. But I know the school board said, you go. I like old books, and there were a lot of old library books. And they said, you go and help yourself to any of the books that you want. And so I picked up quite a few old books that I really treasure.
You got to keep them, you mean?
Yeah, that they said, because they'll just be thrown away.
And so your book on, I forget the name of your book now.
Early Columbia County Schools.
Oh, and there were, you said, approximately 35?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So all this time that you were gathering information, you never thought you'd write a book eventually?
No. And I don't know what really made me decide to write the book. An Albee girl, as part of her high school work, got my pictures and wrote a little history. And I used what she wrote, and then I interviewed people who I knew had gone to these schools. And I collected a lot more information. Mrs. Canwright, when I was collecting material for these schools, I was having for Columbia School, I was having a hard time getting information. People didn't remember, they didn't seem to want to share, and so on. But she said, I'll find something. So she wrote to a Charles Gilbreth, a relative of hers, who was the son of the people who were the first people in Columbia County.
Donated money and so forth.
And she wrote the history of the family and the school too, and that was wonderful. And I used that in my book because I thought it was a wonderful history of Columbia County too, as well
because it was still in the family
as well as Columbia School. Mm-hmm. And so that's how the book came to be written. I visited with people, I'd call people, and people have been so generous about giving their information. It was wonderful. I met lots of interesting people and heard lots of interesting stories.
Can you tell us any little personal things about any of the schools that were special?
Well,
you said something about the Columbia School, the first one, had a sign over the door when it first started?
The first school was in a building that used to be a saloon, and the saloon was across the front of the building. There were two doors, one for the boys and one for the girls to go in. And that was the very first school.
Were they segregated actually in the schoolroom, boys and girls?
Yeah, they were, no, not in the schoolroom, but the entrance was girls and boys. That, I didn't realize that until I didn't realize that schools were that segregated until I read about that from Charles Gilbert's
relatives.
What he had written, because he had mentioned that. It was at Milton Mills. Now Milton Mills the Gilberts, for instance, now, when they came to what is now Dayton, and it was called the Crossing. They stayed there one night, but there were so many rattlesnakes that they backtracked one day's march to where Milton Mills is now, and they that's where they set up their farm.
Now, just approximately, I would say Milton Mills was about Long Station now.
About there, a little.
In that area.
Mm-hmm.
It must have been kind of a little town if there was
It
a
was.
tavern.
There was a saloon, of course, and there was what else was there? Uh,
Would there be a grist mill or anything
I
like
think
that?
that's probably what there was there, and I just don't remember what all was there.
Because we haven't really researched Mill Station, or what'd you say it was?
Milton Mills.
Milton Mills. So there must have been a mill there or something.
There must have been, because it was on the river, the Touchy River.
On the Touchy River.
hmm You see, I do remember Mr. Gilbreth, when he was a young man, the father of this Charles Gilbreth, who had written
The article.
about the article for me, had been here with the Oregon Mounted Volunteers or something, and he thought the grass was so tall and so nourishing that he wanted to bring cattle into this area, and that's why he chose this area, was because the natural grass was so good and so healthy for animals.
Did he ever bring any cattle in?
Yeah, he brought 300 head.
And in the reading someplace, didn't I understand he was the first one to plant wheat also?
Yes, he was. There's an interesting story in the book. One year, Gilbreth had gone to buy, I don't remember where he'd gone, but he's stocked up on provisions, and he was going to sell them at a profit. Well, the winter turned out to be such a hard winter that he had to use these supplies to feed the local people.
Oh, he gave it to the people that needed it.
And finally, they had to use that wheat that he had saved. He was going to plant wheat, a big crop of wheat the next year, but he had to use it to keep them from starving. The snow was so deep, and many of the cattle died because of the cold, hard winter that year.
Which was unexpected, I take it.
It was. I think he came about in the early 1860s.
So he was quite a pioneer.
Oh, he was. He was really a pioneer and a very active one in the building of Columbia County. Well, Leroy Brown donated an acre of ground where the old Columbia school stands now, and the school was built, and Mr. Brown married the teacher that taught at that school. Orpha Cora Brown wrote me a letter about this new school. She said, "My father, Leroy C. Brown, sold the district land on which the school now stands. Most of his adult life, he was director of this school. My wife, Frances, served as school clerk. During the summer, she would take her horse and buggy and drive over the district and register all children 4 and 5 years of age. All this turned into the county superintendent for his records. Frances Brown passed away in 1913 and Leroy in 1922. My brother Rendell started school. Mrs. Turpening taught in a one-room school. She turned the woodshed into living quarters and lived there during the term. I believe Harry Kennedy taught next," and so on. But this school then Beacon Columbia School, and
Central School.
several years later there was an addition made on the west end of the school.
Are you talking about Central School, or are you about
No, I'm talking about Columbia
Columbia
School.
School?
Mm-hmm.
And the Central School in town, wasn't that the second school to start?
Yes, it was the second school in this area.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were many little schools. There was Railroad School, there was Brooklyn School, there was 4th Street School. These were little primary schools of the first 2 grades. They thought people living in
Across town or something?
Across town, across the bridge. That was too far for first graders to walk to Central School. So they built these schools, these primary schools, they called them. One was down by the fairground, that was the Railroad School. One was up 4th Street where, well, about where Jim Munden used to live, if you remember that.
Right.
And Brooklyn School was over on Brooklyn Street, and I've never been able to get a picture of it, nor much about it, so I didn't write it about it, but I've heard
Seems
since.
like it was about where Marjorie Suffield lived, in there
is that
someplace.
it?
Well,
I
that
don't
just
know.
from what people have said to me. I don't know for sure.
But then these schools, Ruth Knight came here to teach in the Railroad School, and she said that many weekends, many Monday mornings, the kids would hunt around in the bushes and they'd find bottles of booze that people had cached, and she said she took them up to the sheriff's office trembling that somebody would think she was the one that
It's taking all the
did
empty
it.
bottles.
She was, but she always took the bottles up to the sheriff's office when they brought them to her.
There was quite a few teachers that came into the county and ended up marrying our farmer boys, right?
Right.
The local girls couldn't get them, and the new teachers
Well,
did.
Olive Holmes was one. She married Ralph Smith. Faith Perringer married Wilfred Thorne.
And Ruth married.
Who?
Ruth, was she born here?
Ruth was from Garfield County. She married, first she married McLary, and remember he was killed.
Didn't he get mixed and fell off in a barbed wire fence or
out
something?
of the loft of the barn and landed on a pitchfork, I heard. And then she married Don Knight. And I don't remember any of the others,
Well, Fay Rainwater married Dale Rainwater.
but she was not a teacher. She was a home agent.
She was home agent.
and
That's
Laurel married
right. Laurel McQuarrie.
Married Claude. She was a home agent too.
And another one was Amy DeRue, was a home agent.
Right.
They just moved in and took all of our potential husbands away. Did you teach at any other little country school?
In Dayton, you
Uh-huh.
mean? No. I substituted sometimes at Starbuck if they needed a teacher, and I substituted in Dayton for many, many years. But I replaced Mabel Rinker when I came here. Mabel had taught here many years.
She was a first grade teacher.
She was a first grade teacher. Mm-hmm.
And you were primarily a primary grades
Right.
teacher also.
I had taught mainly primary grades.
Mhm.
Oh,
Can you tell us something about how you actually, I don't know how authors actually get a book printed. What was all
Well,
the details?
I didn't have any idea how to go about it. I asked around. I asked Alice Williams. Alice was the wife of a former county agent and was a good friend of mine. She suggested I come to Walla Walla and she'd take me around to places she knew of, because she was writing a book. So she took me to this printing copier shop out on Rose Street, and yeah, the lady said they'd never done it, but they would try. And so I took the material down, and they copied what I had gotten together, and printed it and stapled it together. It was I didn't want I wanted an inexpensive book so people could enjoy it who wanted to read the history of these old schools. I just wanted
A book that Joe Blow
book
could
that
read
everybody
without,
would enjoy.
Joe Blow could read without mortgaging the farm.
Right. And maybe I should have gone to Fairfield. There's a printer. I didn't even ask the local editor. I never thought of that. But these people at the copier service were very, very accommodating and did it as cheaply as possible.
I know you sold many of them.
I've sold probably 400.
And people
now, the editor is copying whenever he has space. And so many people have called me and just made a special effort to call me and tell me how much they are enjoying it. And that's what I wanted.
It's being printed in the Dayton paper now.
Right.
About the schools.
Mm-hmm. I know when I was getting the material together, I had things strewn all over the dining room table. And finally one day Lloyd said, "Do you suppose we're ever going to eat a meal on this dining room table anymore?" Because it was such... It took a while to get everything ready.
I was going to say, how many years do you have any idea how many you
Oh,
actually
it
worked
probably
at?
was a year, maybe.
How many?
A year.
Just a year?
But you see, I had
Compiled.
things from many years, and it was just teaching was so different in the early days from what it was when I was writing the book, and that's why I inserted some of the things that I then and now, for instance. And I inserted a little piece by Laura Macaulay Hill on how she got ready for school in the morning, and things like that I thought people might enjoy.
I don't remember that. Can you remember about her getting ready
Well,
for school? How far she had to travel and all that?
Oh, she was an only child, I remember. And she said school mornings were always hectic with chores, breakfast, school lunches to be packed in my little peanut butter bucket, and getting washed up, my hair brushed and dressed, but somehow I always made it. Sometimes Mrs. McGuire, the teacher, rang the bell before I got over the last rise, but when I reached the top of that, it was a downhill run all the rest of the way, and I always made the schoolyard gate in time. She has written 2 books on her life.
Hers are hardback, right?
No,
They're not
they're
paperback?
paperback books.
And you were talking too about Ida Smith. I had forgotten that they had a cafeteria. I thought these little country schools, almost all of them took lunches.
Well, in the early days they did. When I first started to teach, everybody brought his own lunch, and including the teacher. And I remember the first year I taught, I even had to bring the water that the kids drank, and that, you know, in a big syrup pail. And we all drank out of the same dipper, and the teachers had to build their own fires. I remember I even had to chop my own wood. They brought the wood in big chunks, and I had to chop it. But I hired some of the big boys to make the smaller, to chop it up for me, because, well, it was a lot, but I would have made the school board, now I would have made the school board do it, but in those, I was eager to please, I was eager to do what needed to be done, and I did it.
When do you know approximately when they started the cafeteria at Columbia?
I think the first cafeteria was started by women mothers. Frances Macaulay was one.
The mothers probably took turns or something like that.
It was begun in 1952. Darrell Roderick remodeled the kitchen by installing the sink and building a counter. The stove was already in place, as it had been used by the Farm Bureau. Mrs. Rayburn was the first cook. Mrs. Floyd Macaulay and she purchased the cooking utensils, dishes, cutlery, trays, and so forth. Jean Hatfield succeeded Mrs. Rayburn in 1955 and cooked for a year. Then Mrs. Ernest Smith, or Ida, began in 1956 and stayed till the school closed in 1969.
I know Aunt Ida talked quite a lot about being a teacher down there, and when the kids would graduate into high school, she said many of them would write her letters at Christmas and that type of thing, and she really thought a lot about cooking.
She was a good cook. She was a very good cook. She cooked to please the kids. With, you know, she was given commodities like flour, rice, beans, milk, canned fruit, cheese, frozen chicken, turkey, and hamburgers.
That was through the government.
Through the government, and she made the best rolls and the best donuts. I remember. She was just she'd get there early in the morning and open up the school and start to warm it up in the wintertime. And then she and the kids liked her because she tried to please them. She cooked things they liked.
She loved kids.
And she liked the kids. And they really were fond of her.
I know that was the highlight of her life, I know that.
Mm-hmm.
because she always talked about it.
And she and I have developed a friendship over the years. She was just a fine lady. She lived to be, I think, 98 years old.
Right.
Hmm.
They had a big party for her at the nursing home.
Right. On her 98th birthday.
Yeah. And it was, you were there, weren't you?
I was there. Mhm.
Uh-huh. And she really didn't lose it.
No,
mentally.
she was just as alert
Right.
as she could be.
Right.
And
She had a lot of tragedy in her life with losing her daughter and then her husband.
And then her husband. And, but she had a family.
That lived in Prescott. She was
She had
born
a
in
sister
Prescott.
She had a brother, Wesley Jensen. Her maiden name was Jensen. She had a sister, Helen, a sister, Minnie, and a sister, Mabel.
There's a Mabel that lived in Prescott too.
Mhm.
Uh-huh. And I think, was it Mabel herself or was it her daughter that packed the mail for a while?
I don't know.
I think Mabel packed the mail for a while.
And she had a couple of brothers, Wesley, I think,
And George.
and George. And they went to Colville Springs School.
And I think I have a picture of Colville Springs that I got from you.
Hmm. And I have a picture of Ida and her sisters and brothers. It's in the book here
It's in the book.
that Ida gave me. And Francis Wood, who was the father of the county commissioner, George Wood, went to this school too.
And Colville was,
Colville
where is-
Springs was over in the northwest part of the county. It was named for a very fine cold spring of water that furnished a supply of water for the school. And in the early days when the stagecoach traveled, the Mullen Road, which passed very near these springs, the drivers would stop there and refresh the travelers with and horses with the cool, delicious water.
so it must have been,
It was yes, it also had two entrances,
one for
one
boys,
for
one
boys
for girls
and
again.
one for girls. And it had there, of course, there was always a barn because some of the children rode horses to school, and then there were the two outdoor toilets, one for boys and one for girls, and in some places there was a small teacher's cottage where the teacher would live and board herself. Or if she didn't do that, she would take turns boarding at the people of the district,
The parents, the
the
children's
parents of
parents'
the
homes.
children, maybe a month at each home. Or maybe many teachers lived in Dayton and rode horseback. Pearl Martin was one I remember when she taught at Pine Grove. She lived in Dayton and rode a horse every morning out to Pine Grove.
That's quite a little ways.
That's a long ways. But that was one thing I do remember about Pearl Martin.
Well, did you live board with some of the parents?
When I taught in rural school,
Well, in rural schools in Montana?
when
or-
I taught in a rural school in Montana, I lived with people. When I got this school 20 miles south of Malta, Montana, I received a letter from a lady. Would I board with her? And then several days later, I received another letter from another family would I board with them? Well, it was who should I decide to board with? A mother said probably the first letter you received would be the place that you would stay. So I did. And the other people were very angry because I did not choose them. And they made it a little difficult for me that first year.
Well.
But I was very happy that I chose the people I did. It was a rather primitive, almost, place. The home was 4 homestead shanties put together. I had 1 bedroom. The family of mother and father and 3 children had the other bedroom. And the kitchen, dining room, living room was all in 1 room. She didn't even have cupboards to for things. She had tables to place dishes, and she did have a nice range, and she did have a piano, and she played the piano.
But nowhere to put staples
But
or anything like that.
no, it was the most, and of course no electricity. And I had hardly stayed in the country overnight when I went out there to teach. And it was a very learning thing. But it was fun, and I enjoyed them, and I kept in touch. I had kept in touch with them for several years.
So it's not necessarily what they had, it was how nice the people they were.
Nice. She was a younger woman, and she was very friendly. She was very understanding.
Now, when you boarded, you say you boarded with them. Did you have to pay?
I paid $25 a month. The reason I went to Montana, salaries were better. The girls in North Dakota at that time, in 1931, were getting $45 and $50 a month. I got $81 a month that year, and that was something. And I paid $25 of that for board and room. Now, these people that I lived with, he would take my $25 and go to town and gamble. And for a while we had meat on our sandwiches, but toward the end of the month, you see, this was in the Depression when there were no crops, you see, and there were no, the drought was so serious, they hardly raised Russian thistles. And my sandwiches sometimes consisted of jelly, just jelly, and you know how jelly sits on a morning.
All you had was soggy bread. Huh?
And a soggy bread, and then peach. She had canned lots of peaches for some reason, and we had lots of peach sauce. But it was an adventure, and there was a teacher in a neighboring school that I became very friendly with, and we developed a very close friendship and wrote to each other many years.
Those are relationships you'll never have again.
Never have again. And one year Lloyd and I took a trip, and we went to every school place that I taught.
Oh, you just
we just started
made a journey
with,
out of it.
Yeah, we started with Ronan. And on the way from Missoula up to Ronan, I saw a sign that said Doug Allard Indian Museum. I said, Lloyd, you know, I had Doug Allard in the 1st grade. Let's stop. So we did. And just as I was getting out of the car, here this Indian with long braids and a hat came along the sidewalk in front of where we were parked. And I said, I got out and I said, "Aren't you Doug Allard?" Yes. I said, "Well, I'm Miss Ostrud, your first grade teacher." "Oh," he said, "I've often wondered what happened to you. I never heard such a funny name as Ostrud." And he took me in and showed me this wonderful museum that he has put together, Indian Museum.
You
He
probably
was
have
part
plenty-
Indian,
Do you have pictures of that?
someplace, yes.
I gonna say that'd be nice to have.
It's if you ever go up from Missoula to Kalispell and up that way, stop and see this wonderful museum. He hires people, Indians, to do these Indian crafts and sells them there. And he has a very fine museum.
That would be something you'll remember forever.
Yeah. And I still hear from kids I've had in the first grade.
Why is it? It seems like we always revere our first grade teachers more than we do the second or third.
Well, I don't know. I think most first grade teachers probably are very motherly.
They're just a different
You
breed.
just, this summer, I went to a reunion of kids I'd had in the first grade, and they were celebrating their 50th graduation anniversary of graduating from high school. And that was special. There were
Right.
several there that I'd had in the first grade.
Bob Patrick, who went with me down to Columbia School,
Mhm.
he wants to get the Columbia to have a reunion of just all those that went to the Columbia School. But I'm getting too old, I guess. I don't want to get into it.
Oh, it's an awful job. I've often wondered why they haven't had a reunion of the kids. 'Cause
We need to round
the
up all
kids
the...
thought they learned so much at Columbia School. I know I've talked to kids. I'm thinking of Jim Gallagher, for instance. He said, I just loved Columbia School. He said, I think I learned more there than I learned any place.
It kind of seems like a family, right?
I think so. I think they really liked, and I think kids in rural schools heard the younger kids heard the older kids reciting, and they remembered a lot of the things
Kind
that
of
they
like
heard.
osmosis.
It was just, yes, they heard it repeated and repeated. I know a man here in town said to me one day, "Why is it that kids in rural schools learned how to read, they learned how to do arithmetic, and why do kids in town now have such trouble learning these things?" And I don't know.
It was
I
more-
think they heard things, kids in the rural schools heard things repeated, and it kind of
Well, like
made
if you
them
were in the
remember
fifth
things.
grade,
Hmm?
if you were going into the big room, as they called it,
Yeah.
in the fifth grade, you heard the eighth graders, the seventh graders, and the sixth
That's
graders
right.
for 3 years before
Right.
you became in the eighth
Before
grade.
you did. Mhm.
And we used to do the old, was it the Palmer method of penmanship
Right,
that they don't teach anymore, and you
They
can't
don't.
even read anybody's writing now?
that's it. And spelling, I think, is another thing that's not being taught like it should be.
We used to have spelling bees every Friday.
Every Friday, spelling bees, and you'd go to other schools and have spelling bees. You'd have contests, maybe, and I think these rural schools got together. Now I know group school and Mount Vernon School up on the mountain used to get together at Christmas time and put on a Christmas program, and they had a real celebration, a community celebration, and that's what those rural schools were. They were
The families stuck together.
the place where the families could get together for fellowship and have a good time. There were dances at these these schools in many instances until the roads got so good, and people came out from town with booze, and that just ruined the whole thing. So they quit having these dances at the rural schools.
Well, Star used to have dances all the
Right.
time.
Mhm.
And then out to, I call it Willow Creek, but that isn't what the school was called. Out where the restaurant used to be,
Oh, that was Whitebird School.
Whitebird School.
Mhm.
They used to have dances out there.
That's right. And
And the intermission was where you all went outside and watched the fight.
oh, really?
There was always a fight because somebody got a little too handy with the bottle.
Yeah. That kind of ruined the fun of the dances. And then some schools, communities would put on plays and take them to different communities. Star, I know, had
Plays.
had a play, and
They were still doing that in about 49 and 50.
yeah, I know. After we were married, I know we went out to.
And we even went down around Walla Walla to the Granges and the Farm Bureaus and
Oh,
put the
did you?
play on.
Mm-mm.
Uh-huh.
And the schools were the headquarters for the communities to get together for potlucks. Columbia had a club, a women's club, and the Farm Bureau, and they all met there at the school for their potluck meals.
Yes.
But, so I don't know. There are still a few rural schools. There's one that used to come to Dayton for the spelling contest that Faith Thorne, you remember, had every year. But it was called Star School, and I think it was up near Colotis. But they always came for this spelling contest.
And that was just up not too long ago.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
Probably 6-7 years ago.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
10 years ago, probably.
Do you have any special words of wisdom about country schools?
No, I don't. I know when I taught in a rural school, I was always anxious to get into a town school.
Thank you, Charlotte, very much for letting us interfere in your home and your time and all that. We
Well, thank
appreciate
you.
it.
You're very welcome.
And this will go to the archives at the Dayton Historical Depot, so anybody can go and look at it if they so desire.
Oh, that's it.